My name's Uncle Steve, this is my workshop, and in the next 13 minutes, I'm going to show you through the steps I took to build a heavy-duty punching bag stand just like this. I needed it to be both freestanding and capable of carrying the momentum of a 100-pound bag. So I started this project the same as I start every project, and I pulled out the big old bandsaw and got it ready to start cutting some metal. For the backbone of the stand, I'm going to use this 2-inch square tube that's 3/16 thick. That should be plenty strong. And I'm going to bring it over and cut it down to 7.5 feet tall, which will make the top lay just under my 8-foot ceilings and hang the bag just above my eye height. For the neck of the stand, I've got this 2-inch square tube cut off that's 1/8 thick. And I cut this down to 2 feet, which lays just about 2/3 outside the top of the triangle. In hindsight, this was one of my first mistakes. I should have been about 3 feet closer to the edge of the triangle, just to give a little bit more stability. Nonetheless, you can save some time on this step by cutting these at 90 degrees, but I find the little bit of extra time to miter cut them at 45 degrees gives you that sealed off corner and just overall a cleaner, much more professional finish. Now for the base of the stand, I have these perfect cutoffs that are 3-inch by 1-inch rectangular tube cut on 45 degrees to come together to give you a perfect 90. And because this is the base, I can already see a stub toe in my future. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the edge of that foot on a 45 degree as well. That looks a little more friendly to my pinky toe. Next we got to pick through our flat bar scraps, and I just love it when the scraps I need are perfectly laid out for me. These will make up the caps for the feet, I guess that makes them shoes, and a cap for the end of the neck, which is where the bag is going to be hung from. So let's get the saws straightened up and get those pieces cut. For the gusset piece, I'm using a thicker piece of plate out of a small cutoff, which the bandsaw does not like, so we're using the old faithful angle grinder on this one. For the thicker plate, I find the best approach is doing a thin little gouge on your first pass that acts as a guide and coming through a lot slower to cut all the way through on your second pass. Not always the prettiest cuts, but once it's welded in, it'll do what we want and add a lot of strength to that joint. Next, we're going to fire up the drill press, get it to height, and then bring over our little tab that is going to have the punching bag latch feed through it. That latch is going to swing around a lot in there, so let's bring over the countersinking bit and smooth those edges down. I like to bring all pieces over to the bench grinder here, which both cleans off any rough edges left from the saw and rounds the edges to give more room for the molten weld to flow into and give us stronger joints. Once I have the edges on every piece ground down, I clean off the crusties on the table from my last project and I lace up to get ready to weld. I'm going to start with the base, bringing both pieces up and clamping them to the perfectly flat welding table, making sure that they meet at a perfect 90, and then getting them tacked together on all 4 corners. Now this next step is important. Because I'm using a heavy 100-pound bag, I need to do everything I can to add weight and stability to the ends of this base. And I'm going to do this with a hole saw bit by drilling out a hole in the center of the base, right on top where it's going to meet with this backbone piece. I drill a second hole on it about 3 feet from the bottom. Now once I weld these two pieces together, these two holes allow me to funnel sand in the top hole in the back piece and have it flow down through the second hole in the base and move out towards the ends of the feet where I need it. And now that the holes are drilled, I can go back to the base and weld those seams solid. And since we are going to be filling this base with sand, 2 of those pieces of flat bar we cut previously are going to get tacked and welded onto the legs of the base. Does that make them shoot? That's all the welding for the base. Now we can move on to the neck and back pieces, along with all their little trinkets that need to be welded in. And just like with the base, we're going to square it into position, clamp it down to the table, and tack all 4 corners. Then stand it up, measure center of the post, and get that gusset tacked into the middle of that joint. Then I follow the same steps to tack in the hook plate for the bag and the top end cap. Should probably invest in a hammer. And now that everything in this top section is tacked securely into place, I'm going to go around and lay full beads of weld into all those joints. And then doing the same thing to fill in the corner joints. This corner is going to take the majority of strain on the stand, so adding in this gusset plate is going to add a ton of strength, and I take my time to do it in sections to ensure it doesn't pull too much one way or the other off center. They say a grinder and paint makes you the welder you ain't. And this is true, but no matter how good your visible welds are, there's nothing that looks more professional than a nicely ground down weld with the same level of detail. Now that it was time to weld the 2 pieces together, I had to come up with this little redneck jig. I could lay the base into these 2 pieces of pipe I clamped to the table and hit them to align the center of the base with the center of the back post. And once I got both pieces to line up, I tacked it all into position. Now this connection is pretty close to 90 degrees because I built the base on a flat table and my saw cuts pretty close to 90, but the only way I could figure out how to check for sure is with this digital protractor. I laid it down on the back post and zeroed it to 0 degrees, put it up onto the base plate where it read 89.9 degrees, and where I'm from, we call that square, so I welded that sucker into place. This is one of the more rewarding steps in any project. The first time you can stand your piece up, look at it, and although it's far from done, you can see your vision coming to life. Now, as strong as those welds are, adding in these gusset bars will really reduce the amount of movement between the base and that back post. I've actually never made a joint like this. It looks like a regular miter, but then you do sort of a secondary miter to it that ends up looking like this diamond kite. Hard to explain, easier to show. My freehand angle grinder cuts aren't perfect, but those fit in there pretty well, and any of those little gaps will fill with weld, leaving that plenty strong. You get the idea by now. Tack it into place, and weld it solid. Now, why am I tying fishing line with a nut on the bottom? to my stand? Well, because I want to attach a chain to this piece of flat bar, dead center from the bottom of the bag to reduce any swaying. And because it's a lot more fun coming up with little redneck tricks like this over doing geometry. So with all that sorted out, now I'm going to cut my piece into a little trapezoid shape and line it into the base and weld it into place on both sides. Now I need a little nub piece with a hole through it for my chain latch to go through. So I'm going to drill that out, cut it down to size, and weld it to center. Now that the building work is done, time to get this thing cleaned up and sanded down. My paint prep process is roughly the same for all projects like this. I give it a good wipe down with acetone for all the dirt and grease, and then I bring out these 3M scuff pads and sand everything down, and then give it another coat of acetone to clean off any of that loose dirt. Now it's time to make an absolute mess of the shop and get this thing painted. So let's at least throw down a little drop cloth and lower the stand into place. I'm going to cover the bottom of the base in this rubberized paint just to give it that extra layer of sneaker-like grip. And for all the visible parts of the frame, I'm going to coat it in this matte black Rust-Oleum oil-based paint. It goes on better with primer, but for an indoor project like this, I'm not worried about it. Now this next clip is really going to blow you away. Alright. Now once it's almost dry, I'm going to impatiently stand it up on its feet and then finish everything off by misting on this second coat of paint. Now this last little bit of paint is the last bit of work in our project, and we can finish up painting here and let it dry overnight. Boom, and there it is. It's one hard day of work, about $150 of material, and I've got myself a heavy-duty punching bag stand that doesn't rely on any beams at my house. Once I get this on top of a rubber mat and the sand poured into it, it's going to be the perfect addition to my home gym. And with that being said, that wraps up this project build. If you made it this far, I hope you learned something along the way, whether that's what to do or maybe what not to do. Either way, my name is Uncle Steve. This is my workshop. If you're into metal fabrication projects like this, I hope you stick around because I got a whole bunch more just like it coming out real soon.